And as I said at the beginning, if you'd be kind enough to signify if you'd like to ask a question, and we will get a microphone to you, which to save giving you any nasty diseases, the operative will hold the microphone. It's actually on the end of a nice stick, and we'll come to it. Now, can I just see, just out of interest, just at this stage, this doesn't commit you forever to the end of the meeting, just some feel for how many people would like to ask something at some stage. Because if you'd all put your hands up, then I'd be on that 30 seconds I mentioned at the beginning, the question and answer, but we're nowhere near that, which is absolutely great. So we'll start. The first hand I did see was a lady there with the dark hair, so please wait for the microphone and then ask your question. Switch it on, that'll be even better. Okay. Give it another go.
I'd like to know a bit more about how the airport can possibly become carbon neutral by 2030. It's very admirable.
So I'll repeat the question. What the question is asking is she'd like to know a little bit more about how the airport could become carbon neutral by 2030. And I have my expert on those matters, which is Sarah or Marshall. One of the two will say a couple of words on that, because that's an interesting point.
Thank you. That's not working, or is it?
Yeah,
okay, fantastic.
Can you put it really close to your mouth?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for that. Yes, it is of course a challenge to get. It's not working. I didn't think it was. Shall I just keep to all this, sir? Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for that question. Yes, it is of course a challenge for any airport to move towards carbon neutrality, and to do it within the next 8 years or so is a massive challenge. The council generally has a climate change action plan which we are working towards, and we're taking the low-hanging fruit first. So we're doing things generally across the borough and at the airport, like changing our vehicles to more carbon sustainable fuel. We're having our buildings are becoming having renewable energies in them, work travel plans, all sorts of stuff like that. Very small scale stuff at the moment, but it's a start. I've been working with our airport operator, who I'm going to pass over in a minute, on how the actual airport operations can be more environmentally friendly. And Marshall, I will probably get this wrong, but Marshall is the lead for the regional city airports, the whole company, on climate change, so he knows his stuff. And at that point, I'm going to hand over for some specifics.
And while the microphone is passing over, I'd also add a small matter of 20,000 plus trees planted at the airport as well, which we have done.
Okay, hopefully I could just add a bit more to this. So effectively, RCA has a number of airports in the group which are wholly owned, and we have commercial operations which are all passenger based as well as non-commercial. We have worked with KPMG to look at governance, sustainability and environmental aspects, looking at how we as an airport group will fulfil our responsibility to satisfy carbon neutrality by, it was 2040, it may well be accelerated, or it was 2050, but it may well be accelerated now to 2040 and possibly sooner with certain aspects. Now, a lot of that covers everything from the lighting, insulation, it could be down to passenger belts, making sure that if they only operate, because you often see them, they're always going around, that's energy wasted. They should only be operating when some weight is put on it. It's things like that. But where we are working on further improvements for Solent is around what we can bring from that sort of programme of works that are being picked up for the RCA group. So it would be everything from what we can do, i.e. as an individual group within the airport, to make sure that our footprint is lower. UL91 is a good example. We can influence the marketplace and operators to utilise more efficient fuel, which will aid the operational integrity. We can look at how we can improve things like influence the marketplace and operators to utilise more efficient fuel, which will aid the operational integrity. We can look at how we can improve things like taxiway usage. Avoiding aircraft just taxiing for the sake of it, how can we better operate the airfield to make sure that's almost reduced to the minimum, and therefore they're not wasting fuel, which is bringing more environmental issues. It's also looking at how we target our suppliers. So we have a responsibility to push our suppliers in terms of their food chain. What are they doing? So when we put something into the bin, where is that going? How is that being environmentally controlled? So it cuts across a whole raft of aspects of the operation, not just in terms of what we do. It's about the third party. Airports in the UK are operating to a standard which is called ACA. It's an accreditation system which is being run by the Airport Operators Association. So Heathrow, all the major airports are part of it. There's a 6-stage process, and we're at stage 2 as an RCA group. And what I've got to do now is produce a report which will aid the council as the landowner for the airport to make sure that we carry out the best practice and all those things. So that report is due to be produced, and that will hopefully allow us to inform our actions as well as how we can help the airport and the council achieve better improvement to its running of its day-to-day operations.
Okay, thank you very much. A huge topic.
I think I'll let someone else go. That's fine,
I'm
because
just
I've
taking
been
people in the order
texting,
I
so I'll go next.
spotted them. Okay. Gentleman with the blue jumper on first, just there, please.
Good evening. My question is on the word movement. I understand when you talk about 36,000 movements, but I also understand that a circuit and bump is, a guy can have one movement and many circuits and bumps. And if you're sitting under the flight path, I think those of us who are sitting under it are more interested in circuits rather than movements.
Okay, thank you. That's a question I think I can answer. The movements, we measure movements, and a movement is a takeoff or it is a landing, and a landing will require the engine then to be switched off. So a movement, therefore, there are around 33,000 movements per year currently at Solent Airport, and if you take off and land, that would be 2 movements. But you're right, if you fly round and round and round, that is not a movement.
But as seen by distance.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that is the only measure that we have for aircraft movements. It is a landing or it is a takeoff. It is not anything in between. It is not an almost landing or a slowing or touching and going. That's not a landing. Somebody kind enough to switch off the musical accompaniment. Thank you very much. Now we'll come to, yes, it's linked, so
Is that okay? I'll go next. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I have a long list, but I'm only asking one. There's a statement I wish to make first. So, as we're all holding it anyway, I'll just hold it. That's fine. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, I think most people here know that I am. We are one of the most impacted groups in North Fareham as a result of the circuit path from Solent Airfield. This was never in evidence prior to 2019. Now, we have complained about it to the point that the council has made us persistent complainers, as has been reinforced by Mr. Jolly many times. The point is, we wouldn't be making these complaints if the circuits, which total 165,000 a year if they fly 365 days a year, well above the 30,000 cap that Fareham Borough Council have. 40 is even worse, really, isn't it? 40,000 cap that Fareham Borough Council have. So, if you add on the extra 2 hours that the AGL will give for low visibility flying, which, by the way, in G airspace you can't do, because it's VFR airspace, you have to see what's around you, which is what happened when we had the airprox with poor old Coast Guard and the Spitfire going off earlier this year, which caused an airprox, a CAA inquiry, which, although it's exonerated the pilots, because they believed them when they said they weren't in any danger, despite the fact they were 300 feet apart. That was extremely worrying and would have caused an accident over Leon Solent. Other occasions where the CAA have also not enforced are many of the air proxies that we have found and have reported. And as you mentioned, in 2020, the CAA decided they would not uphold them. However, we're now going to challenge that yet again, because there have been others, not least of which today and yesterday. Today, we had 2 aircraft coming over my roof, joining low and perpendicular, 500 feet AGL, over my roof, while BFBR were doing circuits. Now that was Elkie. These are resident pilots. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. It should be stopped. There should be a FISO telling them, no, you can't join. We've got BFBR on the circuit. You can't join straight across the housing. Alternatively, make us noise abatement areas. That way they can't fly over us without sanctions. Blackbush have done it. Other airfields have done it. We should be able to have that facility from Fareham Borough Council. You are under an obligation to protect our interests. You're under an obligation to make sure that none of the residents are impacted by 50% leaded fuel at 165,000 flights flying over our schools, flying over our residents. Lead there is zero tolerance for. It causes ischemic heart disease. It causes massive cancers. It causes cognitive disruption in children, and it's non-reversible. It's cumulative. This is by the WHO, and that is the reason the EU regulations for lead came in. No, the UK government doesn't have aircraft lead regulation, but it should. And Fareham Borough Council are under an obligation under the 2012 Health and Social Care Act to protect its citizens. We are not about closing the airfield. I've had many productive talks with RCA who haven't branded us persistent complainers and are talking to us. Loads of improvements have been made. A lot of pilots now do try and keep to the circuit between the gap, as you know, Sean. Unfortunately, there are many who don't. And unfortunately, many new pilots seeking to join the circuit are still using North Fareham as its way in. They're joining over housing while circuits are going on. This is forcing air proxies. Whether they're reported or not, it's forcing breaches of A&O, which are flying orders by the CAA, for those of you who don't know this. Circuits are the biggest problem here. If you wish to do commercial flying, then flight schools have to be a consideration. They shouldn't be allowed to do circuits over housing. End of. I'm not saying stop the flight schools, but find a circuit which doesn't cause distress, noise, health impacts to the residents of North Fareham. So that, I'm sorry to say, is rather a long tirade, and I didn't intend it to be that long, but unfortunately, when you said that people could go up in low visibility and the AGL would help, well, are you changing the airspace? Is G airspace now changing over Solent? Is that a consideration that you are bringing in? And also, I'd like to know more about the Freeport's licence that you have applied for. How is that going to impact the airfield, and is AGL associated with it? Because late night flying, which is 16,500 more flights a year if they fly every day, as you said they will, at night, will impact all of Fareham and Stubbington, not just Ramble's residents, who go from Cattersfield to Titchfield to half of Fareham and now into Stubbington.
Okay.
So thank you. So if you could answer those two questions, I'd be very grateful.
I think
you didn't know I was coming.
have I reacted badly?
Let's be honest.
Yeah, thank you for putting it so succinctly as well. And I know I've said no kind of speeches, but I think it was important that you had the opportunity to put those points forward. And I think Martin knows who I'm going to look at in a moment to answer some of those points. But there are a couple there that I would need to answer there. Because Martin will need to answer the others. specifically, there was this thing I found, I think I spotted it in the Daily Mail actually, about a Spitfire and a Coast Guard helicopter, which talk about a story that wasn't a story. It's absolutely ridiculous, but I'm sure Martin can comment on that. And also, you asked specifically about Freeport. We haven't applied for any Freeport licence or anything similar, but what I have done is written to the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership to ask why, when there is a Freeport designation across South Hampshire at a number of specific sites, which can be tax sites, which can obviously help trade and provide an attraction, why that wasn't applied to Solent. And so what I want is a proper reply to that. And I have said within that letter that freight would be a potential benefit that Solent could offer. But again, I remind people about aircraft size. This isn't Global Expresses or something else coming into the airport. It is still that same size of aircraft that Britain Northern. Sorry, listen to you lots. Please let me reply.
I will, yes.
Thank you.
Let's just be
But
clear.
the aircraft, yes, I was just about to describe the aircraft and say something like a Britain Northern Islander, which has 2 engines, turbine engines, no lead whatsoever. So yes, potentially then there could be some freight coming into this airport, but it would all be a part of that capped number of aircraft movements. So if we were at pushing 40,000 aircraft movements a year, then of course clearly that would have to be at the expense of something else as things stand at the moment. So I think those are the couple of points that were specifically for me. But Martin, if you can pick up on the others, please, perhaps in the order they were raised, so starting with the alleged air props and then going on
Well, it's
to
not an alleged
circuit.
air props, it was an air props.
It wasn't,
It was
but well,
reported. End of.
it was reported,
Yes.
but please let us answer your very important questions. Martin.
Good evening, can you hear me? Okay, first of all, the air props. So that was filed by the Coast Guard because that had to be, that's a mandatory report because it set off their TCAS, which is their avoidance system. In reality, the aircraft were both in the visual circuit. The helicopter got airborne slower than anticipated by all the other aircraft, and the Spitfire conducted a go-around, which is to the dead side of the runway to continue in its circuit. Because of the speed of the Spitfire and the climb in height, that's what set off the TCAS, which is why the report was filed. In reality, there was no collision. At the end of the report, it says that all safety concerns were satisfactory. There's no collision in there. No,
I read the report.
Yeah, so there was no. It was a very overegged headline from the Daily Mail, which has been
I
brought up
actually
as
read the CA report, I didn't read the...
Yeah. Please let Martin answer.
Can we listen, please?
I read the CAA report.
So there was no evidence of collision ever going to happen at that point because they were both visual with each other. The Spitfire's flying behind the Coast Guard. But I think I've written them all down correctly. Civil air proxies that you say reported, you can't actually report them. They're reported by pilots or by air traffic services. So you may think it's an air prox, but as I said, it's a visual circuit, so those aircraft are visual with each other. If they're not visual with each other, they don't join the circuit. So the instance of Elke joining the circuit with Bravo Romeo's in the circuit itself, the information they get from the FISO is they're joining information, but who is in the circuit, and they can only join in conditions that they are visual with that traffic. So you may think it looks like an air prox, but they're visual with each other. They can see each other. It's see and avoid airspace.
Can I just interject?
No,
Am I not
please.
allowed to? Because
But there are 130 people in this room with similar interests in some cases, so we do need to just let Martin answer the points and move on. And I'm sure you'll touch on the Class G airspace.
Yeah, that was the next point. I've got the Class G airspace. So the class of airspace doesn't really matter what the pilot does. If he's qualified to fly IFR, and we have the AGL and the performance-based navigation, they can fly in Class G airspace. And it's their limitations, not the airspace around them. So if a pilot is qualified to fly in those conditions, they can. That makes it easier.
Okay.
Was there anything else I think?
I think the circuit generally.
The circuit in general. So from yesterday, we've started the trial for runway 23, which is mirrors runway 05. So we're cutting the corner off, it's using the greenhouses, keeps the aircraft in the gap. We're doing that for 1 month. I think we're going to maintain that because if it's mirroring 05, we're doing that already. So I'm hoping you'll see a massive reduction in that. Going forward, I'm still in talks with the CAA about airspace over Fleetlands, so we have aircraft joining directly from that direction rather than coming across the 6-wheel gyrator, which has got a small, which is quite fundled with the aircraft. So we're still in discussions with that. That's quite a large project. But I'm hoping you'll see a difference with 2-3, the circuit change with that. And we'll go from there. But 05, just to slightly correct Sean, the 05 circuit is now in force. We now have that. The trial went very well. Went to the CAA. We're expecting a big airspace change policy. We didn't need to do it because of the services we have, and that's now in force. So we are operating with 105 change.
Okay, thank you.
I want to say
Really
thank you to
helpful.
RCA. Thank you.
Right, let's move on. Next, and then
After the airfield ground lighting has been installed, can you just explain the up to 10 flights limit in the evening between dark and midnight? Is that imposed by government or some other authority? And are those 10 flights largely meant to be of an unscheduled nature?
Okay, thank you. The planning consent is what covers flight movements at Solent Airport. So the planning consent imposes the up to 40,000 movements a year, and am I right in saying that also imposes the 10 flights, yes, before midnight. So yes, it's Fareham Borough Council planning consent which sets those.
Are they of an unscheduled nature?
Martin, can you help with that? Because obviously there are some on occasion, because we've had, like on a summer evening, there will be it. So how you like to explain how the 10 or up to 10 would happen?
The 10, what we're anticipating is we can open, as Sean said earlier, till 6 o'clock during the winter hours. What that means is somebody's joins us for circuits, with the 10 movements, that's only 5 flights, because each one classes one as 2 with a touch and go. It does give us the availability then for corporate and charter aircraft, because what we have seen is in the winter, when people have come in for meetings, they've had to leave at 4 o'clock to reposition to Southampton Airport so they can get airborne again. So that gives us that flexibility with the corporate side of stuff. And it's about the quality of the quantity, I suppose. So if we get that type of aircraft in, the landing fee we get from it, the handling fee, the passenger fee, the fuel, it makes it more worthwhile for that extra hour that we're going to be operating through the winter months. So it allows a bit of both, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
My question was actually the time between normal closing time and midnight. Those up to 10 flights. Are they supposed to be unscheduled, or are they planned?
Well, there would be a few different options. I would think one might be delayed, so unscheduled, a delay has happened,
Sure.
Somebody wants to get in and something has happened that they're coming late, so I guess you'd call that unscheduled. Want to give any other examples, Marty?
Sorry,
The other one would be scheduled.
yeah, absolutely. So if they were scheduled flights, but it gives us that flexibility, I suppose. So we'll have a plan, I suppose, because what the initially will be, because we won't open until 6 throughout the year, is that hour and a half, 2 hours, we then have a booking system that we will know what's coming up forward.
No, I'm talking about the time between 6 o'clock
Between
and
6
midnight.
We're not anticipating a great deal of traffic in that time, to be honest. What it does is give us that availability. So at the moment we haven't got scheduled flights, so I can't really comment that will be for scheduled flights. Hopefully in the future we will have that availability for the short-haul scheduled flights. But as it stands, it'll be for pilots doing night flying training, but they can do that between the hours of 4 and 6 anyway. Because in the winter when it's dark. So there's an element of scheduled, but probably unscheduled. And between 6 and midnight, we're not anticipating a great deal of movements.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
Okay, that helps. Gentleman with the glasses on.
Not really.
I think we'll probably come back to it as well.
We can answer it now.
Gentleman with glasses on.
Perhaps we can answer it
We
now.
will come back, don't worry, I'll bring Martin. I will take the question and then I will go back to Martin. That's all right, I've got to keep things moving, there's only a few minutes left. Carry on.
Thank you for hosting tonight's meeting. I believe that there's another aspect to this that you've missed off your presentation, is that this whole enterprise is actually providing more affordable...
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, thank you for this evening, hosting for this evening. I think there's one benefit that you missed out on your presentation, is that this enterprise that you're embarking on is actually providing you with more affordable housing. Because all those houses below the circuit path at the moment have now obviously decreased in value. So amount of housing available that's more affordable.
Okay, thank you. I think
would you agree with me that has happened?
Thank you. Is that the end of your question?
Yeah, I'm just asking for an agreement,
Okay.
yes or no.
No, I wouldn't agree with you, but thank you.
How about the people that live in those houses?
Thank you. It's
disagree with you.
It's a very subtle one, but thank you for your thought in that. Martin, can you just develop a little more the question that we... Sorry, do you mind?
No, excuse me, do you mind? A question's answered, that's the point of the section.
He asked me...
You may not politically like it.
He asked... Excuse me, sir. He asked me, did I agree? I said no. So the question was answered. Thank you. That was the answer. But can we just carry on? Because there was obviously a little bit more concern around the... I think it's specifically around the 10, isn't it? The after 6 o'clock, before midnight, are those flights likely to be in any way scheduled to be arriving? And I'm guessing the answer is no. But,
I'm going to try and do this. At the moment, the outline planning permission for the airport as it stands tonight and since 2013 allows for these 10 movements per day between sunset and midnight, apart from the search and rescue, which is excluded from that.
Sure.
Nothing will change with that outline outline planning restriction when the AGL goes in. And if we get permission to develop the AGL scheme, then that condition remains. What I'm trying to say is that that condition doesn't drive how the airport will be operated once AGL is installed. It stands as a general catch-all. How the airport will operate once AGL is in is we've undertaken a number of scenarios in order to put a business case together for the investment. We don't know what the demand is going to be for any flights outside of the existing operating hours. We don't even know whether there's going to be demand between sunset and 6 p.m. in the winter. And at the moment, there is no plans to change the airport operating hours. If we get planning permission to put AGL in, then chances are we will reconsider how the airport operates. But it will be, as one of the slides said, completely driven by two things. First of all, demand. So there's no point opening the airport if nobody's going to fly from it. So we need to understand how many planes want to fly and when between the window that AGL allows us to extend the operating hours. And secondly, resources, because we need to keep the airport control tower manned in order for the airport to be operational. And so every half a day, every 4 hours is another big chunk of revenue that we have to raise in order to justify opening the airport. So it's a balance. Now, I can't answer your question categorically because it does depend on those two things, and it may very well change. So there might be a great deal of initial demand for, say, operations up to 6 o'clock, and we might extend the operating hours of the airport, and then it might all fall away, so we'll bring it back. And it really is, it's a business decision rather than, which is kind of captured by the overall planning restriction. And you did ask whether it will be scheduled or unscheduled, and the honest answer is we don't know until we market it, but it's more likely to be unscheduled than scheduled. I hope that helps.
Okay, I think we've gone a fair way on that one. Gentleman with the pink shirt next.
Yeah, Sean, your presentation has been very slick, and the PowerPoint was obviously very interesting. You majored quite a lot on how much business is being done on the airfield, and that obviously is a good thing, but the purpose of this meeting is, in effect, you telling us that you're going to invest £4.7 million in what is, in effect, a speculative venture. Speculative because although you've had experts, Aegis, looking at it, Aegis's report, as with everything else, seems to be confidential. So it's only accessible to members of the council who have, in effect, only your judgment to rely on as to whether it is a good thing or not. The thing is, it's for the air side, and as you've acknowledged, small airfields make losses. Now, clearly in your presentation you implied that there would be an opportunity cost being the losses you make as a result of doing one thing as against another. But actually there is an opportunity cost to Fareham Council taxpayers. You say that this airfield runs and there is no cost to Fareham Council taxpayers, but actually there is, because all the while you're running the airside at a loss and cross-subsidising that with the money that comes in from the businesses, that's money that actually could be returned to Fareham Council taxpayers. It seems like you're trying to operate as a business, but you're actually a borough council. And you seem to be serving the interests actually of a remarkably narrow set of people, those people who have pilot's licenses and obviously some commercial concerns that fly. Actually, you aren't really working for the benefit of council taxpayers. The £4.7 million, if you didn't invest that, not to mention the £15 million going on a theatre in the middle of Fareham that no one's used for ages, that's money that actually could go better into actually fattening up the council tax that you say you have too little of.
Okay, thank you. I was obviously part of my presentation that you didn't perhaps understand, so I apologise. I obviously didn't explain it properly.
I understood all of your
Sorry,
presentation.
I've listened to you. Please let me answer the question. I apologised. I said that there's obviously a bit I did not explain properly, and I'm going to explain it properly now. And that is that you can't take airside and divorce it off from the entire Daedalus operation. And the reason for that is that there are many businesses here which are not airside, but they rely on airside, and they wouldn't be here if there were not an airside component to the site. So the money which is being generated by those non-airside businesses, which is considerable, and returning to the council taxpayers of Fareham every year, that sum would be much shrunken if we did not have an airside here. And that is fact. We have £1 million of income from airside, but more cost, and we have £2 million income from non-airside, with probably about £800,000 profit in that. But that £800,000 profit, from doing some of the calculations that we looked at in terms of businesses which are here and what they are paying, would be shrunken all the way back down. So that is why, like it or not, we have to take the entity as a whole, because if we don't have one, we're not going to have so much of the other. If we don't have the runway, we're not going to have so much of the other businesses here. And that is even before you look at the supply chain which comes into this site and all of those businesses and those hundreds of jobs that are here already. They would not be able to exist without the supplies that they get from without. So, you know, I say I'm sorry, I obviously didn't explain that in a proper way, but that is what it is. If we don't have that, then we have a lot less of the other. Sorry, I've answered your question.
I question the rigour of your calculations.
Yeah,
That's all.
okay, well, I'm happy for you to question them, but I have to rely on a Section 151 officer who has to understand these things, our Director of Finance, far better than I ever could, and with respect, probably far better than a number of other people that don't have that rigour in their job role would be able to do, because basically there are things I'm simply not allowed to do because the Section 151 officer would stop me and the other councillors from doing them, and quite rightly, because his priority is to safeguard council funds and operations, and that is his role, and he's had a huge role to play in this airfield. Right. That gentleman there, you've had your hand up a little while. Can you just wait for the microphone to find its way around to you? No, that was here. It was this gentleman with the stripy shirt. Then we'll go. No, please use the microphone.
Thank you.
Speak.
Hello there, my name is... Yes, I'm very pro the airfield, and I apologise if I'm offending anybody by saying so. And I hope it's got many, many years of success around it. The question I sort of like to ask, in particular, who seems to be monitoring the circuit traffic, is that she makes a good point that the aircraft have to take off and land, pilots have to learn to fly. If we don't do the circuit training, and I'm not a pilot by the way, but if we don't do the circuit training here, where do they propose we do it? It's going to affect somebody somewhere. So as long as it's not affecting you locally, it doesn't matter, I take it. And that's just the first point. I'll listen to that, and I'll listen to your answer. And secondly, I mean, I'm quite sure a lot of you go off on holiday flights. Right. You're in nice big gas-guzzling jets, spreading the stuff all over the countryside. You don't live there, so it doesn't matter.
But actually, there's no lead in those. We've just heard that from Mr.
Sorry, we're not going to have a debate.
So,
No, I'm just
can't
trying
ask
to
me a
make
question
your point.
unless
So,
I can answer it, can you?
think
So,
it's
all I've
Terry,
heard, no,
I'll
Rose,
talk
all I've
to you
heard so far
afterwards.
is
I'll
negative.
talk to you afterwards.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely,
I'm in
absolutely.
support of the airfield. Yeah, I'm not in support of circuits over residents. End of. They can do them on the gap. There's no residents there.
I suggest it's probably best speaking to us about it
Yes.
I mean,
afterwards.
just one other very
This
quick
isn't
thing I
forward.
want to throw in. If, for instance, Sean FBC, RCA threw the towel in and said, what's the point? What proposed views do you think the airfield will have? They'll be covered in houses and industrial units in a week. If people can't see that, it's not going to be a dog walking paradise out there. You know, so come on, let's have a bit of, you know, all right, and a lot of you may affect, and I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's a positive thing. It's money coming into FBC revenue. And I live on the end of runway 23, so I do see aircraft. I do hear aircraft. And I love aircraft. I was born up at Heathrow. I lived next to an active American fighter base for years and brought my family up next to an active fighter base for years. So don't tell me I don't know about aircraft noise. I really do. Yeah, we haven't got noise here. Trust me, there is no noise here.
I don't think you heard
Okay,
about lead and things about
thank
pollution
you.
and about noise.
Thank you. I suggest the specific you had for you probably take up with her separately. If you're, I didn't really detect a question in there, but if you're asking me if I agree with your sentiments, yes, obviously I do. And I think it's useful to have a bit of balance as well. Gentleman at the back now, who was being offered the microphone and had it snatched away from him.
If I could continue talking about the impact of noise on residents.
Can you come just a bit closer to your mouth, please?
If I was a pilot and I went down to Bournemouth and I decided to do circuits around either close to or over Bournemouth residents, and I chose not to do any noise abatement, I would imagine that the citizens of Bournemouth would be extremely upset, and I think they've got every right to be. And I would imagine that when Bournemouth Council found out that I was doing that, they would call me in, strip me off, and tell me to behave myself, or thank you, you're off back to Fareham. That all seems entirely reasonable to me. There's 65 million of us live on this small island. We all have to get on with each other. We all like our freedoms, but we only have freedoms if those freedoms don't impact others. Pilots, if they stick to the strategic gap, if they do noise abate, and some of them do, some of them kind of go in stealth mode, then a lot of these problems would go away. And I would like to ask the airport management and the council to actively go along that line. I fully understand that the pilot can say, yes, it is open airspace, I'm free to do it. But if I chose to tell the citizens of Bournemouth, I'm sorry, I'm not listening to you, I am free to fly anywhere over Bournemouth whenever I want to, it is a ridiculously weak argument, and I would be ashamed to put it forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and thank you for it's a good point, well made, and it's one that we have discussed personally, and obviously we will discuss it further, because there's, if anything could be done to ameliorate a particular concern that brings residents in regarding circuits, then clearly that needs to be done, and we need to see what we can do with it. And you've heard from the airport manager about the new circuit that's going to be implemented, so I'm sure I'll be hearing from you, positive or negative, in terms of what's happening with that.
Just to add, I think the problem is solvable.
Yeah.
We're not looking at a problem which cannot be solved.
Yeah. As I did mention to you before the meeting, and I'm still waiting for this data, I think it is important to know whether the concerning circuits, because I know they're not all concerning by any means, but the concerning ones, that we are able to try and discover whether they were being flown solo by trainee pilots or being flown with an instructor and a trainee pilot, which might get a slightly different connotation on it. So I do want to try and get to the bottom of that data, which we have discussed. Right, running along, we were meant to finish at 7:30, but I'm going to keep grabbing a few more that have had their hands up here for a while. That lady there.
I've had a brief discussion with you prior to the meeting, but as someone who lives in the area, who enjoys the beach, who has grandchildren and kids and loves being on the beach, my concern, and I was a psychological debriefer, post-traumatic incidents, but my concern is the safety aspect of the airfield and what kind of emergency planning. I'd like a reassurance that there is some emergency planning going on a regular basis with all colleagues from health, etc., ambulance, police, etc. But my concern is that when the Navy were here, the type of person flying the plane was someone who was very well trained, very well monitored and managed, planes that were really well maintained. But actually, I am not confident that that is what is flying over my head when I'm sitting by the shack trying to enjoy a cup of coffee.
Okay, so a safety question, safety training, safety practicing. Martin or Marshall?
Thanks. So Emergency Planning Committee, which we have at the airfield, they meet twice yearly, and then part of our licence that we have to have a exercise, whether that's a live exercise or a tabletop exercise. That includes ourselves, Hampshire Fire, the police, South Ambulance Service. We have the emergency response planning from Fernborough Council, Gosport, Hampshire, and Portsmouth. We're due to meet those in October, November again. With regard to training, the fire crews that we have on the airfield train weekly. That's test turnouts, whether that's they'll bowl all the hoses out and turn the water on just for their training as well. We also have live fire training at Bournemouth Airport, and we send it to Teesside for qualifications for low category aerodrome supervisor. So they're all well versed in that element. This was reinforced when we had an aircraft that had an emergency and it couldn't lower the centre carriage. So it circled in the airspace for an hour, allowed all the emergency service to turn up. We were well prepared for it, and they did a grass landing with no after effects whatsoever. So that put our response into practice to make sure we're there. Next year we'll do a live exercise again, just to prove that point. But as we're going through, we'll do before Christmas we'll do a telephone cascade test to make sure the telephone numbers that we've got are working, to make sure the response is always there ready for us. In regards to the pilots training, that's part of the maintenance of the aircraft. They have an annual service, they have a 50-hour service, a 100-hour service, and they check pre-flight, so they check the fuel, they check the engines working properly. They do a pre-flight check, which is on the holding point, and they'll put 2,000 revs through the engine to make sure it's all fully functional. There's always that element of something may happen, but if an aircraft does have an emergency, the first place to look for is a wide area of land to be able to conduct an emergency landing. On 2-3 we have the sea, which you'll quite often see aircraft will go up and you hear the engine noise significantly go down and the aircraft will turn and descend. They'll get to a safety point where they put the engines back on and they'll get airborne again. On 0-5 we have, unbeknownst to us, there's an area of land in the armament section over at Gosport, not far from Fleetlands. We only found out because an aircraft called Mayday had an engine failure and landed there. So that's the point that we've got, and also we have the fields that stretch all the way around in the Stubberton Gap. So we feel very confident if there was an emergency, we can cope very well with it, and we have the resources there to back us up.
Can I just add one thing? There was a supposed pipe bomb, or pipe bomb found in the area a couple of years ago, and everything came to a stop. The police officers who turned up actually turned up at the wrong place. They actually said they didn't know what they were meant to be doing there. It was also an election, a local election day, and they thought they were going to have to close the polling booths. Now, if that is what happens when there is a potential pipe bomb on the airfield, I hate to think what would happen if an aircraft came down and actually harmed a great deal of people sitting or living around the area. I am still very nervous. Nothing you've said has reassured me of my safety. And it's not about noise, not about anything else. It's about the safety of the individuals and the children and everyone who enjoys the beach.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Marshall now to...
I just want to add to it. The pipe bomb, if it was the one I'm thinking of, I was actually in post at that time when it was on the southern part of the airfield. Initially, I had bomb disposal including that. The police, I don't think, were involved with it because bomb disposal took charge and then never required their response anyway, because we were here until 10:30 at night waiting for them to sort that out.
The police were involved all around the area?
Yeah, so they were doing the cordons. They were doing a 200-metre cordon to tell the houses what was going on. Just to satisfy yourself, we have liaison visits with the police and the fire service, and they have airfield tours. We had them this week to make sure they know which gate they enter, which gate they can access, out of hours, during hours, and we have a 1,000-metre response as well. So off the end of each runway, we have a document which says how you get there, what's going to be in the way, what type of ground you're going over, and how quickly you need to get there. So we have all these things in place ready for it, and the units that need to be there in case something happens. We also have the times of response. So it's a very well documented and tested system.
Okay, Marshall,
I'd like to believe you.
I think the point they're making is that all they can do is practice, but we have many aircraft not associated with this airport, all flying over us all the time, and something terrible could happen. Much like James, but Marshall.
Yeah, I would just like to add to what Martin just referred to in terms of aircraft maintenance. All aircraft, no matter what size, are measured and maintained to a set standard, regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority. Companies who actually maintain those aircraft for each customer are rigorously assessed regularly, both on checks by the CAA, where the surveyor will come in on a specific time, or they will come in without notice, and they will look at all aspects of that aircraft's safety. They will measure each of the tasks that are being undertaken at the times that they are due, so you can rest assured, in the sense of what aircraft are flying both here and anywhere in the country, they are regulated stiffly. The UK has got one of the safest records out of Europe and further afield. But there's always, as Martin said, there's always the risk. And none of us can anticipate that. All we can do is prepare in the unlikely event that something occurs, and we are prepared. We do prepare regularly, and as Martin highlighted, we use other facilities within the RCA group to ensure that the team locally here, because they only deal with small aircraft, they are more than capable to manage any event alongside external services who would support, and that's always in the plan.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've counted 20 people have headed out the door since 7:30, so I am going to bring the meeting to a close at this point. But I would say anybody that does want to talk afterwards, you're more than welcome to do it, but out of courtesy for having billed a meeting as until 7:30, I'm a bit naughty to keep running on. So I am closing the meeting now, so thank you very much indeed for your attendance and look forward to seeing you. Nothing to do with that, but the meeting is ended. Thank you.